The annual Al Smith dinner is in New York City, and it's usually has been hosted as is a formality, or attended by rather the Bishop of New York. Just happens to be Cardinal Timothy Cardinal Dolan, hosted this year by Catholic comedian Jim Gaffigan. You know, since I said that about Gaffigan, I have gotten email, I've gotten text messages, and all manner of stuff. My friend BKB and others remind me, hey, TKD, don't be singing the praises of Gaffigan. This is not a good man. He's not a good Catholic. He's a Trump hater. He plays off his Catholicism as part of his comedy act. He is a native-born Hoosier, and this is a friend of mine. I'll tell him anonymously. I used to love him before he started drinking the left-tard Kool-Aid, which coincided with his accelerating popularity. Again, that means he made the deal. He went to the crossroads and made the deal. Went to one of his live shows in India a few years back. Wasn't really that funny. His opening act was more memorable. Lots of people like him, but do not cite his alleged Catholic faith as a reason. We know someone else who is not a Catholic, and that's Kamala Harris. She won't be attending the Al Smith dinner. Joe Doyle, head of the president of the Catholic Action League of Massachusetts. Joe knows this story. Who was the last presidential candidate that did not show up and dissed the Al Smith dinner, and what happened to him?
Mike, as always, I'm happy to be with you and your listeners. The last presidential candidate not to omit attendance at the Al Smith dinner was former Vice President Walter Mondale in 1984. And the subsequent election did not work out well for him. This has been the Al Smith dinner. It's run by something called the Alfred E. Smith Memorial Foundation, and it raises money for Catholic Charities of the Archdiocese of New York. And the host of the dinner is usually the Archbishop of New York. It was established in 1945 by then Archbishop, not yet Cardinal, Francis Spellman, to honor to raise money for Catholic Charities, also to honor the memory of Al Smith, who you might recall died in 1944, the year before that. And since 1960, presidential candidates have attended it. Both John F. Kennedy, the first the first Catholic president, and then Vice President Richard Nixon attended it in 1960. There was then, even though the dinners continued, there was a kind of a hiatus of presidential candidates attending it until 1976, when both Gerald Ford and Jimmy Carter attended. And then in 1984, Walter Mondale recused himself from attending. And then in 1996 and 2004, Cardinal O'Connor was so enraged by the Democratic candidates. Remember, Bill Clinton had just in 1994 had just vetoed a partial birth abortion ban, and in 2004, the nominally Catholic, fake Catholic John Kerry was the Democratic presidential candidate for president, and he proceeded to attack Pope John Paul II, accusing Pope John Paul and the then Cardinal Ratzinger, the future Benedict XVI, of crossing the line of separation in church and state when they called upon Catholic political figures to defend the integrity of marriage. So it was there were no presidential candidates invited in 96 and in 2004, and Walter Mondale declined the invitation in 1984. And now, so this is the first time in 40 years that a presidential candidate has declined the invitation. But I can really understand why Kamala would want to decline the invitation. First of all, it requires her to be spontaneous, which obviously she's ill-equipped at. Secondly, she'd have to appear with former President Donald Trump in a situation where Trump is humanized instead of demonized all the time.
Yep.
And thirdly, of course, she's really the most anti-Catholic figure in modern American history. I mean, we've had some terrible bigots in American history before, both Sam Adams, the cousin of John Adams,
right,
and John Jay, one of the authors of the Federalist Papers, believed Catholics should not be citizens of the United States in the early republic. Kamala Harris hasn't quite said that, but she certainly implied it. She actually, in 2019, she questioned three judicial nominees of President Trump, a fellow named Brian Boucher, who is now a federal district judge for the District of Nebraska, and two others, Paul Mady and Peter Phipps, who are Third Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals justices. The Third Circuit is the one that covers the Mid-Atlantic coast, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and New Jersey, and questioned them about membership in the Knights of Columbus, and actually asked them if they were aware that the Knights of Columbus had this extreme position, which he described as opposing abortion, which is rather like asking them, is the Knights of Columbus a Catholic organization that supports the teachings of the extreme Catholic Church? The U.S. Constitution forbids a religious test for public office.
That's right.
And this vile insinuation of dual loyalty, promoting the kind of bigoted assumption that fidelity to the Catholic faith was a disqualifier for federal office, really represented a willful subversion of the explicit language of Article 6 of the Constitution, which says no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States. Now, this is very important for Catholics because Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution was the Edict of Milan for Catholics in the Anglosphere in the 18th century. Now, we know that there was the Quebec Act, which granted Catholic toleration in Quebec, but that was for the Francophone, for the French-speaking Catholics of Quebec.
Right.
This is the Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution was the first time in the English-speaking world since the Protestant Revolution of the 16th century that Catholics were granted their civil rights and allowed full citizenship and the opportunity to hold public office. And the Constitution of the U.S., by the way, was ahead of the constitutions of the various states. Various states at the time, including Massachusetts, still had religious prohibitions for holding office. Until 1820, Massachusetts had a provision in its Constitution requiring holders of public office to forswear all allegiance to any foreign prince or prelate or any authority, civil or ecclesiastical, which clearly, prevented Catholics from holding any kind of public office in Massachusetts. By the way, the Constitutional Convention, which repealed that in 1820, the chairman of the Oaths Committee was Daniel Webster. So we should thank Daniel Webster for removing that anti-Catholic provision from the Massachusetts Constitution. I'm sorry, Mike, you had a question.
No, Joe. I had 2 points. One point is in the Federal Convention of 1787, which I know just a little bit about. I wrote a movie about it, The Spirit of 76. You can still get the DVD and the CD set at shop.mikechurch.com. The state of Pennsylvania, Joe, when it drafted its constitution in 1776, the state of Pennsylvania was the first state that included no religious office test or no religious test for office. It's in the 1776 Constitution, and I know where it came from because I read his autobiography. It came from James Wilson. James Wilson was a Scottish immigrant whose parents had fled supposedly some sort of religious persecution in Scotland and came to the United States. So Wilson is in on the Pennsylvania version of him. Wilson attends the Federal Convention of 1787, and so does the only Catholic, Charles Carroll of Carrollton. So there you have the specter, and we all know that Charles Carroll of Carrollton wasn't the greatest Catholic in the world. His brother was Bishop Carrollton, but I think that's probably why in the Federal Convention, why it came up and why it was included in Article 6.
Well, we had another Pennsylvania Catholic that attended the Constitutional Convention. That was Fitzsimons. Well, actually, he became the congressman. I'm not sure whether he attended the convention. But you had, Pennsylvania, even in colonial times, was a haven for Catholics. John Barry, the father of the American Navy, the Irish Catholic immigrant from Wexford, he lived in Philadelphia. So you actually had open Catholic churches, that is to say, Catholic churches that were not underground, that were in public spaces like St. Mary's in Philadelphia, which George Washington actually brought John Adams to for a Vespers service.
Yep.
So you actually, Pennsylvania really led the way on religious freedom for Catholics. But it was Article 6 that allowed religious freedom for the entire federal government and for the whole country. Now, again, it didn't affect state office holders, but it affected anybody serving in federal office, either elected or appointed. So we should really value Article 6, and we should value this. And Kamala Harris is the first United States senator in modern memory, to essentially try to subvert Article 6. So I think it's quite reasonable to say that Kamala Harris is the most anti-Catholic public figure in modern American history. And it isn't just Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution. She was one of the co-sponsors of the Do Not Harm Act and the Equality Act, two pieces of left-wing pieces of legislation which would eviscerate the Religious Freedom Restoration Act and force Catholic hospitals to perform abortions and gender surgery, would erase the conscience rights of Catholic physicians and nurses and pharmacists. It would turn Catholic church halls and Catholic hospitals and Catholic schools into public accommodations for the purpose of civil rights legislation, which means they would have to accommodate people based on both the so-called sexual orientation and so-called gender identity, which is more accurately described as gender discordance. So this is someone who has not only really ignored and subverted Article 6 of the Constitution, but has pushed the most extreme anti-religious freedom legislation imaginable. So this is again Harris is more radical than either Biden or Obama, and certainly much more anti-Catholic than any prominent American political figure in the last 200 years.
Well, she does have a partner in crime in the U.S. Senate, and that's Mazie Hirono.
Yeah, and Elizabeth Warren in Massachusetts and others, Yeah. But and speaking of Elizabeth Warren, by the way, like Elizabeth Warren, Harris is committed to shutting down pro-life pregnancy care centers, crisis pregnancy centers. When she was the Attorney General of California, of the state of California back in 2015, she was one of the supporters, and she claims to be one of the sponsors of something called the Reproductive Fact Act, which mandated that pro-life pregnancy crisis centers, including those that are part of the religious ministry of a church, provide information about and post information in the facilities about abortion. So this was an assault on the First Amendment rights of freedom of speech and the free exercise of religion. Kamala Harris, if you look at her the totality of positions, she's really hostile to the constitutional rights. She seems to be the whole American notion of civil and religious liberty is found in America's founding documents, whether it's the Declaration of Independence or the U.S. Constitution or the Bill of Rights. They seem to be completely alien to the thinking and to the experience and to the aspirations of Kamala Harris. This woman was the anchor baby, the Canadian educated anchor baby of two third world residents who were here on student visas.
Yes, sir.
And not to be unkind, but she doesn't seem to have any American instincts or traditions or value system that are at all discernible.
Yeah, Joe, I did a little research on this, and I can tell you that Kamala Harris's mother came to the United States at the urging of her mother, of her grandmother, and for the specific and stated purpose of not seeking a better life or becoming an American citizen, she came here to get an American PhD. Her father left Jamaica and went to the University of California, Berkeley, for the same purpose. He couldn't get a PhD that was worth a darn in Jamaica, so he went to UC Berkeley and finished his studies and became and got his PhD. And as President Trump keeps pointing out, the guy brags about it. If you go to Stanford University's website, Kamala Harris's father is listed as an authority in Marxist studies. It's on the site. Now, none of this is made up, but we're going to run out of time, and I have so much more I want to get into with Joe Doyle. If you want to know all about Harris and her parents and the fact that she's not a natural-born citizen, go to my X.com page and go find my, Maggie will find it, throw it in the chat room at crusadechannel.com/chat. We made a video all about this. She's not a natural-born citizen. She's ineligible. She shouldn't be anywhere near the presidency, but not enough time to talk about it. I'll just leave it there for now. So next thing I want to talk to Joe Doyle about, president of the Catholic Action League. Joe, you called this out when the Republican Party platform came out in July of this year and had removed the planks on pro-life. You said what needs to happen is they need to be told no. You need to push back. So 3 Fridays ago now, it'll be 4 Fridays this Friday, President Trump on Thursday gave a speech in somewhere in Michigan, and he introduced a mandatory IVF thing and said he was going to vote against he was going to vote for the Florida Proposition 4 in Florida. Well, the dam of Catholics and pro-life Christians must have broken forth, because by Friday afternoon, Joe, Trump had backtracked. Was out endorsing a no vote on Proposition 4, has not said IVF on the trail, except one time when he was asked a question about it in the debate. And as you pointed out, what needed to happen happened. Good people told the Republican Party, no, stop it. Do not go do not oppose life. You were right.
Yeah, it also shows that pressure works, and with any politician, you have to hold their feet to the fire. Look, we acknowledge that President Trump was the most pro-life president in history, even more so than Ronald Reagan during his first term. But he's been walking away. In fact, he's been galloping away from us in 2024. And as we pointed out at the time, these establishment pro-life organizations, like the Catholic Vote and Susan B. Anthony and National Right to Life, instead of being the enablers of Trump's defection, that they should be engaged in resistance and pushback and criticism. And this finally happened, I think, on almost on a grassroots level with this Florida amendment vote, where again he flip-flopped within 24 hours. So it shows again that pressure works, and you have to keep putting this pressure on them. According to polls for the Republican Party, 3% of all Republicans find abortion, it should be higher, obviously, abortion to be the most important issue. So that's an important part of his base. And in a close election, any politician that alienates his base imperils his future. So if you want Donald Trump elected, one of the things you have to do is pressure him and put as much pressure on him as possible not to walk away from his pro-life base and his former pro-life positions. He's taken he's used language like reproductive rights, which no Republican candidate has done. He's endorsed Smith Christone. He's now come out for this insane IVF mandate with both federal funding and an insurance coverage mandate. So, Catholics and pro-lifers and others and social conservatives have to push back on this, and they're actually helping him by pushing back against him because he's making mistakes by alienating his base, and mistakes that could prove to be deadly in November. So my advice is for Catholics and pro-lifers to put pressure not only on President Trump but again on these establishment pro-life groups and tell them if you want Trump elected, then you really have to pressure Trump to hold firm to his previous convictions.
Joe, have the prayers of the people, the Archdiocese of Boston, the good Catholics there, and there are many, they're just not as many as there used to be. Have some of their prayers been answered? Is the new bishop was a surprise to you? I haven't had a chance to ask you about it, but you wrote about it, saying it was that who Pope Francis installed as the bishop of the Archdiocese of Boston wasn't who you thought it was going to be. So anything to report on that front?
I mean, there were a lot of reports that somebody very liberal, like Bishop McElroy and Cardinal McElroy in San Diego, would end up in Boston. So we didn't have a high-profile modernist left-winger. Now, dealing with the Catholic hierarchy, there are no traditionalists, and there are a few people who are even overtly kind of Novus Ordo conservatives in the Catholic hierarchy. So it's all relative. But from what I can gather about Bishop Henning, who is the former coadjutor and later the Bishop of Providence, who's only been there about 15 months. He's not quite as left wing, let's put it that way, as many other possible candidates. Now, I talked to some Catholics who are both pro-lifers and Catholic Latin Mass traditionalists in the Diocese of Providence, and they think he's only been in there about a year and a half, less than a year and a half, and they think his administration in Providence was very benign. Pope Francis had ordered that all Latin Masses cease at parish churches, and he's apparently allowed not only the Fraternity of St. Peter to continue Latin Masses, but a parish priest to continue the Latin Mass. He's also supported the Mother of Life Center, which is really one of the strongest, most militant pro-life groups in the Mother of Life Center in Providence, which is one of the best pro-life groups in New England. And he supported the Chesterton Academy, which is this new classical Catholic high school.
Oh.
So conservative and traditional and pro-life Catholics have, in Providence at least, have a very, very kind of favorable view of him. Now, I think the danger in Boston is that there's a large, the Archdiocese of Boston has a large left-wing apparat of all these apparatchiks, and there's also the major donor class are all social liberals, and the Archdiocesan bureaucracy is liberal. So the real question is, when he comes to Boston, does he get captured by the bureaucracy and by the major donors and by the politicians and by the media, or does he become his own man? So I think we need to pray for the independence of Archbishop-elect Henning.
All right, well, let's do it. Joe, that's all the time we have for this visit. As always, you can find Joe at the Catholic Action League of Massachusetts, and we'll look forward, if we don't talk between now and then, to seeing you at the St. Benedict Center, Joe. Thank you.
I will, and I look forward to seeing you in October. Good luck, Mike. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's always great to hear from Joe Doyle.